Hey everybody, starting to get a little chilly out here. I get bundled up, got the beanie and the jacket on, and some hot chocolate to warm up with. It's that time of year. And it's funny because, it makes me reflect on it's that time of year where we're all looking for warmth. And some of us don't rely on the warmth that comes from inside us. You know, I'm sure that went over quite a few people's heads, but for those that didn't. But speaking of reflecting and things on my mind, this latest Bible study lesson that we did in the church, we've been studying spiritual warfare, and this last lesson was on Job. Now, I've said before, I know a little, some stuff from the Old Testament, but I am not super familiar with it. I was aware of Job, who he was, and some of what he went through, but I had never read the story through before myself. And I really did myself a disservice, by not looking into that sooner, because let me tell you, Job is a man after my own heart. Um, you know, he was a master of detachment. He had no ties to any material things or even people. He was able to let go of things, like myself. How many times have I? Granted, I've never had as much as Job to lose as much as Job, but how many times in my life have I literally took myself down to lost everything, like I didn't have anything to and built myself back up, and then smashed it and built myself back up, back and forth, and I've lost material possessions, I've lost people, I've lost my health, and through all of that, through all those trials and tribulations, Job never lost his integrity. He stood by what he had always stood by. He didn't let his circumstances change who he was within himself. Integrity is a big thing for me. Unfortunately, I see there's a lot of integrity missing from the world, in this day and age. But so I did one of my little deep dive Bible studies on integrity, and there was a lot. So I didn't put everything, but I did make a little shorthand because it bounces all around. Proverbs, there was a lot of like little 1 and 2 liners in Proverbs, so I put them all together into one big thing. So I'm going to read this to you. This is a description of biblical integrity, or in the words of Proverbs, which is the book of wisdom. For the Lord gives wisdom; from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly, with integrity. That's what uprightly means. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. So you may walk in the way of goodness and keep to the paths of righteousness. For the upright will dwell in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or the left. Remove your foot from evil. He who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his ways will become known. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. Folly is joy to him who is destitute of discernment, but a man of understanding walks uprightly. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips and is a fool. The righteous man walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one perverse in his ways, though he be rich. Whoever walks blamelessly will be saved, but he who is perverse in his ways will suddenly fall. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. That in itself was quite a bit, but then again, my better understanding of Job, I wanted to take a few things from Job. And this is kind of, again, I'm kind of Frankensteining this together, but this is two different parts of the book of Job. Chapter 27, verses 3 through 6, and chapter 31, verse 6, all tied together. And this makes for a great speech, and it really makes me, respect Job, despite all he's been through. And mind you, this is later in the book. So this is after he's been through, all these trials and everything's happened to him. And he's lost everything. And I mean everything. Except his life. That's the only thing he still had. And this is what he had to say. As long as my breath is in me, and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast, and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live. Let me be weighed on honest scales, that God may know my integrity. And then, of course, whenever we talk biblically, like all that was Old Testament, let's see what Jesus has to say about integrity. Right? We're going to go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Say what you mean, and mean what you say. That's a whole lifestyle. And I've learned through experience, people don't like you, when you have a lot of integrity, when you follow up, when you walk the walk instead of just talk the talk. That makes a lot of people uncomfortable, because some people aren't at that stage in their life yet. They haven't had the experiences to bring that out of them. And when they see it in others, they really, it irks them. It's more a sense of guilt than anything else. Which is ironic, because we're supposed to lead by example, show others. And it's funny that they resent that example at times. And for my last part on my, study of integrity, we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 50, 53, and 54. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does corruption inherit incorruption. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. And I remember the first time I read that one years ago. Like, that one I didn't find in this study. I've known that one, but that one has always been a powerful verse to me. And that kind of gives me more of an understanding why, as I put things together, as I do these studies, I connect more of the dots. I get more of the pieces put together. I get to see the bigger picture. And that's why we, do this. That's why I sit us down and look these things up and share them with you, because I'm trying to help everybody else put the pieces together just like I am. You know, we're kind of in this together, trying to figure things out. But you can't work together if you don't have integrity. You know, you can't expect all the benefits without accepting any of the responsibility, which is the way most people want to operate, in today's society. It's unfortunate, and we see our society unraveling as a result of it. People don't feel safe anymore. You know, Nobody really trusts their neighbor these days, and it has changed us as human beings. I say it all the time. We've been trained to be so hyper independent that we have lost our sense of community. We ignore the fact that, our ancestors are only alive because they worked together. And now everybody's trying to do everything for themselves and not look out for one another, and we're quite literally running ourselves into the ground by doing so. It's been, like I said, ever since I started this lesson on the study, it's been on my mind, and I put all these things together. And it makes me feel empowered, because I that's who I try to be. I say all the time, I am who I say I am. I'm not perfect. I'm human. I am fallible. I fall short. But that doesn't stop me from trying to be better each day. And, if you get in the habit of lying, right, you have to remember your lies. Otherwise, you get caught in them. Who wants to live like that? Like, you have to juggle the difference between the story you made up and reality the way you even remember it. Or you lie to yourself so much you change the memory, even though other people know what really happened. Narcissists run into this problem. It's just not, it makes zero sense to me to be running around lying. And don't get me wrong, I've been caught in lies myself in the past. But that's kind of what made me realize, one great memory that stands out is one time when I was a kid. I was playing baseball out in the yard, and we had the storm windows were like to the side of a shed, and when we were throwing the ball around, we broke one of the things, and we tried to hide it, me and my friends at the time. And, it got found out pretty quick. But then I was a kid, I didn't know better. But that's one of those things that when the time came to put those storm windows up, we needed those to be intact. To keep in the warmth in the home, to keep the elements out. And by lying about it, it made a bigger problem down the road. Whereas if I had just been honest and came out and said, hey, we were messing around, this happened, this got broke, what can we do to fix it? And then we would be ready when the season came. By lying it and putting it aside, then when the time comes, you're not ready, you're not prepared, and then you suffer even more consequences. That's just one example. But again, through my life, I have learned, and I'm one of those people, I don't get away with nothing. I really don't. Like, God absolutely holds me to a higher standard, because anytime I try to get away with something, boom, instant consequences. It has been that way my entire life. I do not get to skate under nothing, And when I get the consequences, I get the full consequences. I don't get, oh, well, I understand this part of it, maybe not get it so bad. Yeah, no. Well, once. That did happen once, and I will admit that was a big one, so I appreciate it. But other than that, every time I get nailed, I get nailed. And that's because, that's who I signed up to be. That's who, I firmly believe that we, in a sense, sit down with God before we come to this earth and say, this is, I'm a firm believer that the whole point of this life, this physical world, is to build our character. Because think about it, you come to the world with nothing and you leave with nothing. And that's something else that Job said, a couple times. I came with nothing, I'm going to leave with nothing. The only thing you have is your character. That's what you develop through your lifetime, and that's the part of you that people miss when you're gone, is who you were. But they can only miss who you were if you are a person of integrity, if you were somebody they could count on, if you were somebody that did right by others. But we get in this narcissistic society. We all have those traits because, again, it's that individualism instead of thinking in terms of community. And I know people like to twist that. Remember, there's a huge difference between community and communism, right? We're not talking about some political system, or economic system. We're talking about a way of living. Look out for one another. That's what we are supposed to do. The more eyes, the more backs you cover, the more eyes should have your back. And unfortunately, one of the lessons that I have learned this year is just because you give something to somebody does not mean that you are going to get it back from them. That's a lesson I've been showed my whole life, and it took till now for it to sink in. But that's where integrity comes in, because just because you are not getting it returned to you does not mean you stop giving it out. Right? If you see something is missing in the world, then it's your job to become it, to embody it. Right? So if I feel like integrity is missing, which I've stated, then I should live my life in such a way to show others the benefits of having integrity. I should make people want to be like that through my example. And that's how we're supposed to live. I've talked before, that tattoo on my arm, the Knight's Code, that's not just a whimsical thing. Like, that's something I try to stand by. Look out for the little guy. Protect those that can't protect themselves. Say what you mean what you say. Be honest. Be truthful. Be trustworthy. It shows in this world that there's a lack of trust because everybody questions anything that's good. That saying, too good to be true. Sometimes it's not too good to be true. Sometimes we're too broken to accept the good that is in front of us. And that's part of accountability too. You can only meet others as far as you've met yourself. And too many people are in this world right now are afraid of depth. They're afraid to look deep within, and they're afraid to be deep with others. They see that as vulnerability. But it's all part of communication. How do we better understand each other without being open and honest with one another? It's an impossibility. You don't bring people together by manipulation. Not with a strong bond, anyway. If you want a strong bond between people, it has to be a genuine, and again, not transactional, not tit for tat, but reciprocal, meaning you can count on this from me and I can count on this from you. And yes, we understand. We give each other grace. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall short from time to time. Mistakes are okay. You got to learn from those mistakes. But it's when they become a pattern, when you do the same thing over and over and over again, and then complain about the results. Yeah, that's insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, that is insanity. Right? Integrity is doing the right thing no matter what anybody else is doing, no matter if you are being watched or not. You know, we live in a society of Big Brother. There's cameras everywhere. And it's really starting to show human nature, I think, because back in the day when, you know, there weren't cameras everywhere, it was a lot easier to hide who you were. But now, you know, social media, people getting things in the background or seeing something they don't like and posting it, or just in general surveillance. There's eyes everywhere. And the easiest way to live is with integrity. Yeah, you caught me on camera. Okay. You know, that's the same mentality of I wouldn't say something behind your back that I wouldn't say to your face. Don't do anything unsupervised that you wouldn't do supervised. You know, it falls back to the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. And too many people are losing sight of that. You know, it's slipping through the cracks, and that's why everybody's so miserable. The only thing you can rely on in this world anymore is unreliability. You know, you can't trust most people. You can't trust politicians, government. You can't trust corporations. You know, everybody is looking out for their own best interest. And that is what is, again, in end times, people will be lovers of self. We are seeing that right now. And we are destroying ourselves with it. Because of our unwillingness to put our ego aside and have some humility and work together, compromise with others, and work together to become stronger together. You know, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that, I see that rampantly every day. People do not have integrity or principles. You know, they don't draw a line in the sand and say, I refuse to cross this. You know, they'll put a little line in the sand, but then if somebody says, well, then you won't fit in with us if you don't do this, or, you know, there will be consequences if you don't do this. Be like, I don't care. I'm not crossing that line. You do what you got to do, but I refuse to cross that line. People have lost that mentality. You know, everybody's willing to move that line a little further back. Be like, okay, well, I want this, so I'll compromise myself for that. Like, no. You know, too many people are materialistic in this world. You know, you're chasing things. Don't get me wrong, it's nice to have things. But what does it profit a man if he gains the world but loses his soul? That's biblical too. You know, when I leave this world, when my time comes, I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. There's been quite a few close calls. But, you know, I want to know, if to nobody else but myself, that I was true to myself and myself was true to others. You know, if people start, you know, spreading lies about you, if you walk with integrity, that stuff doesn't bother you. It really doesn't. because you know who you are, and you show others who you are by your action. You don't have to impress them with some... that's something else I don't like in the legal system, is you give this eloquent speech and you manipulate the wording of the law and you can get away with things. Like, no. That's our legal system is based on a lack of integrity. And people don't see that, and it drives me nuts. You know, it's how can you twist? Yes, this is in the rule books. This is a law. But if you can twist it, then you can get away with it. Where does that make sense? Because it certainly doesn't to me. Our entire everything, our legal system, our economic system, our political system, all of them are corrupt to the core. And people just accept it. And it drives me nuts. Like, again, they let, I got to have the latest, iPhone. I got to keep up appearances. I got to have the nicest car. You run yourself into the ground trying to prove yourself to people that don't even matter. At the end of the day, you have to like yourself. And that's how I live my life. I might not have a lot of things. I certainly don't have money, but I can still sit in a room with myself and be okay. I can look in a mirror and, like what I see. That's priceless. That's something a lot of people don't get to experience in this world. Not today, anyway. I do. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10. But you got to make changes. You got to have accountability to know what changes to make. It's all a big domino effect. It all works together. If you have an opportunity to be like Job, take it. Even when things are at their worst, show the world your best. Even if your best is only 10% of your normal capacity, show it. Give it. Some days are harder than others. And some days are easier than others. It's about the consistency of your effort. That's integrity in a nutshell. Do the same thing every time, no matter the circumstances. No matter who's watching, no matter who's around to influence you, no matter how you feel about it, no matter, your energy level. Because a lot of people let things slide because they're too tired to deal with it. That's one of the ways we lose our integrity. Because I fell into that trap years ago. I had to do a lot of correction in that department. Anyway, I'm droning on here longer, and I know the people that need to hear this probably have jumped ship by now anyway. They haven't wanted to hear it, but I'll put it out there anyway. But yeah, morals, principles, integrity. You want to live a better life, not an easier life, because let me tell you, it's not easy living this way. Not at all. But it's a better quality of life. Because a lot of people's hang-ups are how other people perceive them. But if you have integrity, you don't have to worry about that. You just be you. You be your authentic self. You correct, what needs to be corrected. And you display what needs to be shown to others. You give the example that you feel they need. It really is that simple. Remember, there's a difference between simple and easy. Keep it simple. The more complex something is, the more corruptible it is. We were just talking about the different systems. Yeah, because we've let people muddy them, make them complex, complicate them. The more complicated, the easier it is to slip something in that can change everything in the end result. There's an exception to every rule. What's the point of having rules if there's an exception to every one? That's not safety, that's control. Yeah, let that one sink in. Anyway, it's a lot of food for thought for one day, and this is like twice as long as it should be. So I'll wrap it up there, but just please, seriously, give it some thought. All right? So, as usual, keep taking care of yourself. Try and help take care of each other where you can. I'll see you in the next one.